Tonight, ICE and DEA crushed Chinese drug ring hiding under LA restaurant chain. $93 million exceeds.
At 4:47 a.m., federal agents moved. Across Los Angeles County, simultaneous raids hit 23 locations. The operation involved over 380 ICE and DEA agents, coordinated through DHS command centers, supported by local SWAT teams and federal task forces. What they uncovered that morning would expose one of the largest Asian drug trafficking organizations ever documented on American soil. Not Mexican cartels. Not street gangs. This was a Chinese organized crime network operating so quietly, so expertly hidden behind restaurants, import businesses, and money exchanges, that it had been moving approximately 2.1 million fentanyl pills per month directly into American neighborhoods without triggering federal alerts for nearly 4 years. The first target was the Jade Garden restaurant chain. At 4:47 a.m., the main Los Angeles location on Wilshire Boulevard looked dark, closed, normal for that hour. But DEA surveillance teams had been watching for 6 months. They knew that the restaurant closed to public customers at 10 p.m., but the kitchen never went silent. Lights stayed on in the basement. New people arrived through the back alley. Different rhythms. Different deliveries. The fog hung thick over Los Angeles that morning. Pre-dawn cold. The street was empty except for a few delivery trucks and the sound of distant traffic on the 110 freeway. Then silence. Complete silence. The kind of silence that happens 30 seconds before something breaks. At exactly 4:47 a.m., ICE and DEA agents in tactical gear hit the front and back entrances simultaneously. Flashbangs detonated. The stained glass doors of the Jade Garden exploded inward. 20 agents moved through the dining room in synchronized formation, weapons raised, voices shouting commands in English and Mandarin. The main dining area was empty. Cheap red tablecloths. Framed pictures of the Great Wall on every wall. A dragon statue by the register, frozen in mid-pose. Then they went downstairs. The basement door was reinforced steel, painted over to look like wood. Agents breached it with a battering ram. The door gave way. Below, under 6,000 square feet of false flooring hidden beneath storage racks and old kitchen equipment, agents found something that made the lead investigator, Special Agent Marcus Chen of the DEA, pause for a moment before speaking into his radio. "We have a lab. Full operational laboratory. Multiple pressing machines. Bulk fentanyl. Multiple kilogram quantities already packaged for distribution." Simultaneously, across Los Angeles, the same scene was repeating. At a supposed import warehouse in Vernon, ICE agents were finding packaging equipment, heat sealers, and 847 kilograms of powdered fentanyl awaiting processing. At a money exchange in Chinatown, federal agents discovered a hidden room containing $3.2 million in cash stacked in organized bundles, with ledgers written in coded Mandarin accounting for narcotics transactions spanning 3 years. At a logistics firm in Torrance, agents found encrypted servers, communication equipment, and detailed shipping manifests showing routes that connected Los Angeles to San Francisco, Phoenix, Denver, Chicago, and New York. But the most shocking discovery came at a residential property in the San Gabriel Mountains north of Los Angeles. This was a compound, 12 acres, multiple buildings. Federal agents approached it with military precision. The main house was a 4-story mansion with walls 12 feet high. When agents breached the front entrance, they found something that would change the entire direction of the investigation. Inside a climate-controlled vault on the 2nd floor, agents discovered what appeared to be the central command center of the entire operation. Floor-to-ceiling servers, monitoring stations, communication arrays, digital maps of the United States covered in red and blue markers indicating supply routes and distribution points. But more importantly, agents found something that would take them far beyond simple drug trafficking. They found sealed steel boxes containing what appeared to be government documents. Official letterheads, encrypted drives, communication logs, and a master ledger that listed names. Dozens of names. Some were known cartel associates, but others were different. Some had titles next to them. Law enforcement titles. Government positions. As boxes were being loaded into federal vehicles, one agent found a folder labeled Operation Harmony. Inside were photographs, surveillance images, and a list of protected routes, specific highways and border crossing points where shipments would pass without inspection or delay. This changed everything. 21 hours after the initial raids, agents moved their findings to the FBI Cyber Forensics Division in Los Angeles. The task was massive. Decrypt the servers, crack the encryption, build the network map. By 2:15 a.m., analysts had their first breakthrough. The servers weren't just tracking drug shipments. They were tracking everything. Fentanyl produced in clandestine labs in Mexico and brought north through tunnel systems near San Diego. Cocaine sourced from Colombia through maritime routes disguised as agricultural imports. Methamphetamine manufactured in hidden facilities in the high desert east of Barstow. Heroin processed and repackaged in the basement labs under the Jade Garden and 4 other restaurants throughout Southern California. But the network went deeper. The financial analysis revealed what federal investigators called architectural sophistication. Shell companies with clean names: Golden Dragon Logistics, Pacific Import Services, East-West Trading Group, Harmony Bridge Enterprises. These companies had bank accounts, legitimate business licenses, tax returns. They looked real because they were designed to be real. They actually did import goods. They actually did move freight. But integrated within those legitimate operations were hidden cargo flows carrying narcotics. The money was laundered through restaurants, money exchanges, gem stores, and a chain of acupuncture clinics spread across California. Federal financial analysts traced $93 million moving through these front businesses over 36 months. The operation was extracting approximately $2.6 million per month in pure profit from the United States market alone, money that was being sent back to Asia through cryptocurrency exchanges, wire transfers hidden in invoice payments, and physical cash smuggling operations that moved money out through the same tunnel network that brought drugs in. But the real shock came when analysts cracked the encryption on the main command server. Inside were organizational charts. Detailed ones. The operation had structure. It had a hierarchy. There was a logistics director responsible for moving products, a financial manager overseeing money flows, a security chief coordinating protection. But above all of them, marked only as the governor, was a single contact list entry, one encrypted identifier, one name hidden in a secure partition that took analysts 4 hours to decrypt: Governor Adrian Castellanos. The name meant nothing at first. Analysts ran it through databases. Nothing. No criminal record. No known associations. But then they found the connection. Governor Adrian Castellanos was the current elected governor of California. Or rather, a fictional one in federal documents that referenced him in connection with a special security arrangement for protected trade corridors operating through the state. As agents dug deeper, they found something that made the entire investigation shift into a different category of severity entirely. There were internal emails, encrypted messages, schedules, communications between the governor and operations managers discussing specific dates when ICE checkpoints would be unmanned, when border crossing inspections would be deliberately slow or non-existent, when specific highways would have police details pulled for training exercises, when sheriff's deputies would receive coded messages directing them away from particular routes during specific time windows. This wasn't corruption in the traditional sense. This wasn't a few officers taking bribes. This was orchestrated. This was engineered. This was a cartel that had built a shadow infrastructure inside California's law enforcement apparatus. The DEA lead investigator, Special Agent Chun, stood in the Federal Operations Center at 6:42 a.m. looking at the digital network map projected on a 40-foot screen. Red lines connected the cartel's various nodes. Blue lines showed money flows. Green lines showed supply routes. The entire state of California was lit up like a circuit board designed to move narcotics. "This isn't infiltration," Chun said quietly to the assembled task force. "This is a replacement." They didn't compromise the system. They built a parallel system. And they used legitimate authority to protect it. The realization was chilling. The cartel didn't just hide inside law enforcement. They had created a second law enforcement structure, one that actively protected narcotics flows instead of stopping them. By this point, federal oversight at DHS level had escalated the investigation to the highest priority. The scope was now continental. The implications were systemic. What investigators discovered over the next 36 hours was that Operation Red Pagoda wasn't just a California problem. The network extended across 12 states. The routing architecture was designed to move narcotics efficiently across the entire United States while using California as the primary hub. From Mexico, drug tunnels near San Diego brought in methamphetamine and cocaine that was distributed through Northern California routes to the Portland and Seattle markets. Fentanyl from overseas sources, brought into ports in Long Beach and San Francisco, was routed through the restaurant and import business network to Denver, Phoenix, and Las Vegas distribution hubs. From there, the narcotics flowed eastward to Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, and New York. The scale was industrial. Investigators estimated that Operation Red Pagoda was capable of moving approximately 47 tons of narcotics per month without triggering federal alerts. 47 tons per month. That's enough fentanyl pills, approximately 2.1 million pills monthly from just the fentanyl operations, to poison an entire region. And it was happening quietly, systematically, protected. The human trafficking component was even more disturbing. The network used migrant smuggling as cover. Real immigrants and asylum seekers paid thousands of dollars to cartel-controlled smuggling operations that moved them through Arizona and California borders. But hidden within these same shipments, disguised as additional migrants, were cartel operatives, stolen goods, and small quantities of high-purity narcotics being moved to distribution points. The migrants themselves became cover. Hundreds of human beings transformed into camouflage for industrial-scale drug trafficking. One frozen forensic file, recovered from the seized servers, contained a strategic plan. It was labeled. Inside were projections, financial models, expansion plans. The document outlined how the cartel intended to deepen its presence in law enforcement, judicial systems, and state regulatory agencies over the next 3 years. The goal was explicit. The cartel would have solidified enough influence to create what the document called permanent operational security, meaning they would have enough senior officials, enough judges, enough agency directors under their control to make federal intervention structurally impossible. This wasn't just a drug organization anymore. This was an attempt at state capture, an organized crime syndicate trying to engineer permanent control over a state's infrastructure. At 5:30 a.m., federal operations shifted into a new phase. The coordinated takedown would begin. The operations center was in downtown Los Angeles, 3 stories underground, massive digital displays, satellite feeds, real-time GPS tracking. Over 1,200 federal agents from ICE, DEA, FBI, DHS, and special units from Naval Special Warfare were coordinated through this command center. 34 SWAT teams, 4 Black Hawk helicopters staged at LAX for rapid deployment, air support coordination with the Air Force, naval vessels positioned off the California coast ready to intercept suspected seaborne narcotics deliveries from Asia. The target list was immense. 78 simultaneous raids were scheduled across Southern and Northern California, Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado. Each location was a cartel node. Each one was hit at precisely the same moment, 6:15 a.m. Pacific Time. In the high desert east of Barstow, approximately 140 miles northeast of Los Angeles, federal agents raided a massive methamphetamine superlab hidden inside what appeared to be a solar energy facility. The lab occupied 6 warehouses connected by underground tunnels. When agents breached the first warehouse, they found processing equipment capable of manufacturing approximately 400 kilograms of methamphetamine daily. Laboratory equipment was seized. Manufacturing operations were shut down. Over 2,000 kilograms of finished methamphetamine were seized, along with the precursor chemicals needed for another 3 months of production. Simultaneously, in the wealthy hills above Los Angeles in an exclusive gated community, ICE and DEA agents raided a mansion belonging to the cartel's financial director. The home appeared ordinary from the outside: landscaped gardens, security gates, expensive cars in the driveway. But inside, on the 3rd floor in what appeared to be a wine cellar, agents found a vault. That vault contained $8.4 million in physical currency, organized in bundles, each one marked with colored rubber bands indicating denomination and destination country. Alongside the cash were ledgers dating back 5 years, documenting every major transaction, every payment to corrupt officials, every narcotic shipment. In Vernon, at the import warehouse, federal agents found something that demonstrated the scale of the operation. 32 tractor trailers were parked in the facility. Laboratory analysis of random containers revealed that approximately 70% contained some quantity of narcotics hidden in false compartments. The remaining 30% were legitimate goods, but those legitimate goods served a purpose. They provided cover. They made the facility look normal. They passed inspection because most shipments were actually clean. The narcotics came through in the margins of legitimate commerce. Inside the governor's home, federal agents found a hidden study on the 2nd floor, concealed behind a false wall in what appeared to be a storage closet. Inside this study, agents discovered encrypted communication devices, phones and laptops that connected only to cartel networks. More importantly, they found physical evidence: documents bearing the governor's signature authorizing specific law enforcement actions, not authorizing investigations or enforcement against the cartel, authorizing reallocation of law enforcement resources away from cartel-controlled areas, authorizing special security details for specific highways during specific time windows, authorizing delays at border crossings when scheduled narcotic shipments were en route. The documents were dated and signed. They created a clear paper trail showing that the governor had been actively directing law enforcement resources to protect cartel operations. Federal investigators discovered that the governor had been compromised by the cartel approximately 5 years earlier, before he had even been elected to office. The cartel had identified him as a rising political figure with ambitions for higher office. They had provided financial support to his campaign through shell companies and donations under fake names. They had assisted his election. And then, once he was in office, they had collected on that investment. The governor had resisted initially, according to encrypted communications recovered from the servers. He had refused to cooperate. But the cartel had leverage. They had evidence of campaign finance violations. They had recordings of meetings. They had money trails. And most importantly, they had threatened his family. By the time the federal investigation reached him, the governor had become a willing participant. He had rationalized his cooperation. He told himself that the amount of narcotics being moved was small compared to national totals. He told himself that the communities being destroyed by fentanyl overdoses were not his responsibility. He told himself that the arrangement was temporary, that he would eventually find a way to escape it. None of these rationalizations changed the fundamental reality. The governor of California had become a criminal. He had become an asset of an organized crime cartel. He had used his position and authority to facilitate the destruction of thousands of lives through drug trafficking. While federal prosecutors were building cases against the 34 corrupt law enforcement officers and the fictional Governor Castellanos, another team of investigators was calculating a different kind of toll. The DEA's epidemiology unit partnered with state health departments and medical examiners across the country to trace the source of overdose deaths back to Operation Red Pagoda. The investigation was painstaking. Each death had to be verified. Each source had to be traced. But by the end, the numbers were clear. The cartel's operation had directly caused approximately 14,700 overdose deaths across the United States over the 36 months of its operation. 14,700 human beings died. That's approximately 408 people per month dying from narcotics directly attributable to this single cartel organization. The deaths were concentrated in communities that lacked resources, neighborhoods without adequate addiction treatment facilities, cities with minimal harm reduction programs, rural areas where addiction was stigmatized and treatment was unavailable. The cartel had destroyed communities. It had fractured families. It has created epidemics. Federal agents, conducting community liaison work in the days after the raids, encountered the human cost directly. One investigator described meeting a mother who had lost her 17-year-old son to a fentanyl overdose 2 years earlier. The boy had taken a single pill, a pressed fentanyl pill. He had believed it was something else. It wasn't. He was dead within 90 minutes. The mother asked the federal agent a simple question: could this have been prevented? The agent was honest. Yes, he said. If we had caught this operation sooner, your son might be alive. The woman nodded. She had nothing else to say. That conversation repeated hundreds of times across California and the nation. Each one represented a failure. Each one represented lives that could have been saved. Each one represented communities that could have been protected. The immediate takedown phase of Operation Red Pagoda was complete. The cartel's infrastructure was destroyed. The leader was arrested. The money was seized. The narcotics were off the street. But the real work was just beginning. Federal oversight teams were brought in to systematically review law enforcement operations across California. Every major decision made by the 34 corrupt officers was scrutinized. Every investigation they had touched was reviewed for potential compromise. Every arrest they had made was evaluated for legitimacy. Some cases had to be dismissed because corrupt officers had been involved in the evidence chain. Some suspects who had been convicted on evidence gathered or processed by corrupt officers had to be released or retried. The criminal justice system itself had been contaminated by corruption, and it would take months to identify and address every point of compromise. The law enforcement agencies affected by the corruption initiated major internal reviews. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department brought in external oversight boards to review its entire command structure and hiring practices. The California Highway Patrol commissioned a complete audit of its training programs and ethical standards. ICE, DEA, and FBI all initiated internal investigations to identify any other potential compromises or corruption indicators. Federal oversight of the governor's office was established. Constitutional scholars debated whether the fictional Governor Castellanos should remain in office pending trial or face immediate removal. The question was both legal and political. Allowing him to remain in office while facing federal charges for corruption was untenable. Removing him raised questions about federal overreach. In the end, the fictional California legislature voted to remove him, and a lieutenant governor with no apparent cartel connections assumed the position. But the damage remained. Trust in law enforcement had been eroded. Communities that had suffered the worst impacts of the cartel's operation now looked at police with suspicion, wondering if they could be trusted. Some neighborhoods demanded that corrupt officers' supervisors also face discipline. Others demanded that the entire law enforcement structure be rebuilt from the ground up. Federal investigators also conducted a comprehensive investigation into the cartel's international connections. Communications seized from the servers revealed that Operation Red Pagoda was connected to organized crime networks in China, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia. The cartel was receiving precursor chemicals and finished fentanyl from overseas sources. It was sending profits back to Asia. It was part of a global narcotics supply chain. The investigation crossed international borders and involved coordination with foreign law enforcement agencies. At a tunnel entrance near San Isidro in San Diego, ICE and DEA agents, supported by Border Patrol teams, discovered an underground narcotics superhighway. The tunnel was reinforced with wooden supports and electric lighting. It extended 340 meters from Mexico into a warehouse in San Diego. Inside the tunnel, agents found approximately 1,200 kilograms of cocaine, 340 kilograms of heroin, and nearly 4 million fentanyl pills. 400,000 more pills than analysts had estimated the tunnel could move in a single shipment. The scale of production was staggering. The efficiency was terrifying. At a migrant transit house near Phoenix, federal agents discovered what amounted to a human trafficking depot. The property held approximately 340 migrants at the time of the raid. Some were asylum seekers genuinely trying to reach family in the United States. Others were cartel operatives using migrant routes as cover. The conditions were horrific. Overcrowded. Unsanitary. Federal agents found hidden compartments where fentanyl and methamphetamine were being stored alongside the people. The narcotics and the humans were being transported as a unit. The humans providing cover, the narcotics providing profit, the entire operation moving under the radar of immigration enforcement. In 6 hours, federal agents had seized the following: 4,700 kilograms of cocaine, 890 kilograms of heroin, approximately 12.3 million fentanyl pills, 8,100 kilograms of methamphetamine, $47.2 million in U.S. currency, an additional $31.1 million seized from financial accounts and cryptocurrency exchanges. 12 cartel operational leaders were arrested. Dozens of lower-level operatives were detained. 17 firearms were recovered, along with approximately 100,000 rounds of ammunition. But the most significant seizures were the digital ones. 53 computers, servers, and encrypted devices were taken into federal custody. These devices contained the entire operational blueprint of the network. The routing, the schedules, the payments, the names. By 2 p.m., the underworld had taken more damage in 6 hours than in the previous 6 years of law enforcement action against Asian organized crime in California. What came next was perhaps the most painful part of the investigation for honest law enforcement officers. The forensic analysis of seized servers and communications revealed the extent of the internal corruption. FBI investigators, working with internal affairs divisions from multiple agencies, began cross-referencing communications found on cartel servers with personnel records, salary information, and work schedules from law enforcement agencies. The pattern became immediately clear. 34 law enforcement officers across 4 agencies had active communications with cartel operatives. 34. Some were low-level patrol officers who would receive coded text messages warning them to avoid certain areas on certain dates. Others were more senior. A lieutenant in the California Highway Patrol had coordinated with cartel logistics to ensure that way stations were unmanned for maintenance on specific dates when massive narcotics shipments were scheduled to pass through. A captain with ICE field operations had provided advance notice of planned raids on cartel facilities, giving operators time to move product or establish alibi structures. But the most damaging discovery involved the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. 8 deputies, including a sergeant and a lieutenant, had been actively working for the cartel. Not passively accepting bribes. Not looking the other way. Actually working. Actively directing patrol units away from cartel operations. Providing security for drug shipments. Coordinating with cartel security personnel. One internal investigation discovered that a lieutenant had personally escorted a narcotics convoy from San Diego to Los Angeles, using his police authority to ensure the shipment passed through multiple law enforcement checkpoints without inspection. Federal agents conducted internal raids on police departments and sheriff's offices across California. 34 law enforcement officers were arrested. Badges were stripped. Weapons were seized. Officers who had taken oaths to protect the public had instead become extensions of a criminal organization. What made this worse, what made this truly devastating to the agency personnel watching the investigation unfold, was the realization that this had been happening for years without detection. These officers had attended training. They had been promoted. They had been trusted with weapons and authority. And all the while, they had been systematically betraying their agencies and their communities. One FBI special agent interviewed after the arrests, who had worked law enforcement for 27 years, was visibly shaken. "You spend your whole career believing in the institution," he said. "You believe that the badge means something. You believe that the system works because most people are good. And then you find out that the cartel had built its own police force inside your agency, and you never saw it coming." The corruption went beyond just operational support. Financial analysis revealed that the cartel had paid approximately $2.4 million in bribes and salary supplements to these 34 officers over a 3-year period. The payments were made through offshore accounts, cryptocurrency transfers, and wire transfers disguised as consulting fees. The officers had been given significant raises without explanation. Some had purchased expensive homes on salaries that shouldn't have supported such purchases. Others had sent their children to expensive private schools. The money trail was obvious in retrospect. It should have been caught years earlier. Federal investigators discovered that at least 2 of the officers had been approached by supervisors with concerns about unusual financial patterns, but those supervisors had then experienced sudden transfers, demotions, or forced early retirements. The cartel had anticipated that honest officers would raise questions, and it had prepared responses, using its influence over senior leadership to suppress internal investigations before they could gain momentum. But the most shocking discovery was still to come, and it involved the fictional Governor Adrian Castellanos directly. Federal investigators, now with full prosecutorial authority and warrants signed by federal judges, conducted a raid on the governor's residence at 7 a.m. This wasn't a scene of dramatic action. There were no flashbangs. There was no violent resistance. Instead, federal agents in business attire arrived with sealed warrants and escorted Governor Castellanos into custody with minimal resistance. He appeared confused, unprepared, almost as if he didn't believe that federal authority could reach him. Federal indictments had been issued. The fictional Governor Adrian Castellanos faced 47 counts, including racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to distribute narcotics, and misdemeanor. The 34 corrupt law enforcement officers faced charges ranging from drug trafficking conspiracy to bribery to extortion. The 17 identified cartel operational leaders faced capital drug trafficking charges. Prosecutors announced that they would seek the maximum penalties available under law. The trials would take years. The appeals would stretch beyond that. But the outcome was already clear. These individuals would spend decades in federal prison. Some would likely die in prison. The immediate seizures totaled $93.2 million in currency and financial assets. Another estimated $40 million in cartel assets, property, vehicles, equipment, would be seized through civil asset forfeiture proceedings. The narcotics seized represented an estimated street value of approximately $340 million. In economic terms, law enforcement had dealt the cartel organization a damage blow estimated at over $470 million. But perhaps the most important seizure was less quantifiable. The cartel's organizational structure was destroyed. Its command hierarchy was dismantled. Its protected routes were exposed and closed. Its corrupt law enforcement assets were arrested. Its money laundering networks were shut down. The infrastructure that had allowed it to move tens of thousands of kilograms of narcotics per year through American communities was gone. The story of Operation Red Pagoda is not unique. Similar operations have been discovered in different states involving different cartels and different forms of corruption. What makes this operation significant is its scale, its sophistication, and its revelation of a fundamental vulnerability in democratic institutions. Organized crime and cartel organizations don't need to conquer the government through violence. They don't need to topple institutions through terrorism. They only need something much simpler. They need silence. They need ambition. They need the willingness of individuals in positions of authority to compromise their oaths for money, for protection, or for the illusion of control. The fictional Governor Adrian Castellanos didn't wake up one morning intending to become a cartel asset. He was gradually compromised. He was given financial support when he was an ambitious politician with debts. He was given assurances of protection once he was vulnerable. He was given rationalizations to justify his cooperation. And by the time he fully realized what he had become, he was too deeply entangled to escape. The 34 corrupt law enforcement officers followed a similar trajectory. They didn't join the cartel. The cartel came to them. They were identified as exploitable. They were approached. They were offered money. They were threatened. They were gradually drawn into a system of complicity that eventually required them to actively protect narcotics traffickers and facilitate overdose deaths. The real cost of Operation Red Pagoda is not measured in the millions of dollars seized or the tons of narcotics removed from American streets. The real cost is measured in the 14,700 lives lost. The families were destroyed. The communities were devastated. The institutions were damaged. The trust eroded. But there is a counterpoint to this dark story. There is also the fact that federal agents, honest law enforcement officers, and federal prosecutors maintained their integrity throughout the investigation. They pursued leads that implicated their own institutions. They arrested their colleagues. They challenged the governor of the state where they worked. They did this because they understood that the integrity of law enforcement depends on accountability, even when, especially when, that accountability is painful and costly. The lesson is clear. Power does not require open violence to be destructive. Power only requires silence. Power only requires the willing cooperation of individuals in positions of authority, willing to compromise their oaths for personal gain. And the protection against that kind of power is perpetual vigilance, institutional accountability, and the willingness of honest people to speak against corruption even when it is costly to do so. If you are still watching this story, if you have stayed engaged through this narrative of corruption and cartel infiltration, please share this story. Comment below. Make it clear that you want corruption exposed. Make it clear that you understand the stakes. Make it clear that silence is complicity. This story is fictional, a dramatization, but the vulnerabilities it describes are real. The tactics it documents are documented in actual cartel operations. The only thing that stands between functional democracy and cartel-controlled governance is constant vigilance, strong institutions, and the willingness of people to demand accountability. Remember this story. Remember Operation Red Pagoda. Remember that the badge only means something if the people wearing it choose to make it mean something.